Okay, nobody leave. Okay, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to the Innovation Hour. My name is Harvey Wade. I'm delighted to welcome you to April's version of the Innovation Hour. What does it take to create a new insurance market? And we have Simon Ritterband from Moonrock Drone Insurance joining us. Before I get going into this, I do want to just thank Sonar for sponsoring us. So I just have to read this out. If you're looking for your next insurance partnership, investment or acquisition, Sonar, these guys work with over 50 of the world's largest insurers and reinsurers, helping them to scout and connect with the best-in-class innovation. In addition to the SaaS platform, which tracks 3.5 million companies, they employ a team of researchers who can help you tap into better map the market, identify new areas of growth, and provide insight on who to work with and accelerate your innovation activities. Get in touch or take a trial of their platform. Head to sonar.global. You won't regret it. Okay, message over. Simon, welcome.
Thank you for having me. That's very kind of you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for joining us. I thought I was going to have to potentially send out a drone to somehow sort of kind of get you into the same place as us, but we're here. Let me just introduce Simon for everybody. Simon launched Moonrock Drone Insurance. I've just said Moonrock because as soon as I say Drone Insurance, it just takes too many words. So in 2016, with really no background in insurance, all the drone market just knew how to fly drones. Moonrock was the first UK's dedicated online platform-based insurance scheme, solely offering policies to the rapidly expanding commercial and consumer drone market. It's now one of the largest drone insurers in the sector. Simon has earned a reputation as an industry leader for drone insurance, sitting on government and regulatory advisory committees for drones, which consult with the CAA and the Department for Transport. So Simon, thank you and welcome to the Innovation Hour. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. It does sometimes still shock me when you look back through that and you say to yourself, well, if you'd asked me 10 years ago, 5 years ago, what would I be doing? And insurance is certainly not something that springs to mind, and most certainly not drones, because it's obviously so new and exciting. Yeah. So you hear that back from an external point of view, you think, oh, is that really me you're talking about?
Yeah, exactly. Well, Simon, why don't we? So you didn't start in insurance. So how did you get to here? Tell me a little bit more about, because you've got quite a fascinating entrepreneurial background. So I'd love to sort of tell me a little bit more about your story of how you got your mindset of how you sort of operate in your career so far.
So yeah, absolutely right. I mean, there was actually a part that you missed out, is that I have got no experience. I had no experience in insurance. I had no experience in drones, and I wasn't actually really even a drone pilot to start with. But if I sort of maybe take a step back, if you look at where in terms of starting out educationally wise, it wasn't very auspicious. I wasn't very auspicious academically. But I always had an idea, a vision of things, of how they looked and how see a bigger picture of opportunities. And I left university without much idea of what to do, but had a view of things I wanted to do, and be more of looking at things from a different point of view. And I had a media company which I'd sold quite early on, and then sort of moved into some property development work. And it was then that this sort of idea came about growth and looking at new opportunities. And bizarrely, it was one of the builders had called me up to discuss something about property, looking at the roof. And I was like, "Why are you calling me? Just send somebody up, because I've got a thing called a drone." But this was 2015, right. And I said, "I don't know what you're talking about." So I went down to see what he was doing, and literally he got this thing out of a box, and he went into the air and took some pictures and came back down again. And it was just one of those moments like, this is interesting. I'll investigate this further. Yeah. So went online, and there were a number of companies offering drone pilot training. So went to sign up for a course, became a qualified, in inverted commas, drone pilot. And part of the requirements was to get insurance to operate commercially. But you go online to look for insurance, as you would do nowadays, and you type in insurance, but there was nothing there. And you have to do some digging, and you have to speak to various brokers and go to the aviation markets, and then send back reams of questions. And then you look at the wording, and there was like 40 or 50 pages of very dense aviation wording. And some would come back saying, when your aircraft comes into the land, make sure the wheels are engaged, and crossed out the word aircraft and written drones. I was like, well, this is weird. So I decided to write a business plan, not knowing anything about insurance, and literally maybe about a week's worth of drone knowledge. And I thought, well, there's an idea here, there's a kernel of idea. Wrote a business plan, sent it off to a couple of people who I knew in insurance, made its way to Hiscox at the time, who called up and said, this is quite interesting, let's have a chat about it. At which point I was like, oh my God, I really don't know anything. But we made it work, and 6 months later, we launched a product specific for drones, the first drone insurance product on the market. And then 3 months after that, we had the first click and bind online click and bind policy as well. So it was very, very bizarre how it all came about.
So, I mean, it sounds like you're kind of, I mean, you sort of skipped over the fact that you kind of had sold one company and then you kind of did this. It sounds like you're kind of a bit sort of like, spotting opportunities, and then you've almost got that, I wouldn't say the ability to kind of take risks, which obviously you are, but that like, well, I'm going to try something new. I'm going to jump into something new. And where do you think that kind of comes from? Because
I thought it actually happened with the first business as well. The first company I worked for there was maybe 3 of us it was in the .com era, and the owners had asked me to go and set up offices in New York and LA, which I did.
Yeah.
And it was whilst I was living in the States, I was watching TV and watching programs, and there was lots of branded content, product placement as we'd call it nowadays. And I thought, that's quite interesting. So when I came back to the UK, I sat down with a mate of mine from university who was in media, and we sort of picked up the phones. And I think the idea was I'd always just pick up the phones and speak to people in that industry and see if there was a need. So I'd pick up the phone and call up a production company and say, oh, I see you're making a film.
Yeah.
Do you need any brands? Do you need any sponsorship? And they go, yeah. And I'm like, well, can you send me a script? And then I'd call a brand up and say, I've got a script that's looking for to see where the gaps were. So there was always an idea. I knew a potential opportunity, but it was really more about how you go about it. I've never been afraid really just sort of pick up the phone and inquire about it. And I did the same actually with the insurance for the drones. I went onto the CAA's website, and this is before I'd actually had any product. And the CAA would list all the pilots' names. They wouldn't give any contact details. But with a bit of investigation, you look at Facebook or Twitter accounts, and you can sort of find out how. And I would just either drop people an email or just literally cold call them and say, I'm thinking about doing this. Would this be something that you're interested in? And if you call up enough people, maybe 10, 15, 20, you get an idea of what the appetite is in the market. Yeah. So I wasn't trying to create something brand new, because obviously I knew it already existed in America for product placement. And I knew that drone insurance existed, but not a product that I thought was fit for market. So I think it's more about having an idea, making sure there's a market and following it up and being engaged with customers.
Yeah. I think that is one of the key things. It's easy to have the idea, but it's that kind of then that throughput of how many, that hard work. So I imagine there's probably a few things out there that you kind of went, oh, that's not working, but you kind of focused on the.
So you get a feel for it, and I'm very much of the belief that I don't think I could sort of sell anything. It could be slippers, it could be garden lawnmowers. But my view, and I say this to the people in the office, is the customer is ultimately the most important thing. So it could be, a funeral plot.
Yeah.
You've got an end customer. It could be a pair of slippers. But make sure you're serving this customer before absolutely anything. So the team in the office know that the first thing they do every single day is to make sure there are no outstanding customer inquiries, any concerns, any questions, any emails that have come in. The customer must always be dealt with first, regardless of a project they're working on or a longer term vision project for the business. Customer at all times.
Yeah.
And insofar as that, it was actually quite detrimental because as I started to grow the business and have hundreds of customers and then thousands of customers, a lot of them would have my phone number. So being called all the time, which is great because there's engagement there, but it gets to a point when I've got people calling up saying, hi, Si, it's Steve. And I'm like, which Steve? I'd like to keep a track of all their names, but it gets to a point when you can't do that.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. I think I think there's kind of a couple of routes in this conversation, but what I'd love to do is you kind of spotted this opportunity that you didn't really know too much about drones apart from kind of how to fly them. You've done a course, then you've kind of the insurance. You're going, well, this is a bit rubbish, and then you just kind of contacted Hiscox, and then they said, oh yeah, that sounds interesting. Tell me, I want to understand a bit more about. Somebody's gone, oh yeah, it sounds interesting, and there's probably an element of fear, panic, excitement that's going on. Can you tell me a bit more about that journey of how do you then move from, is this just my problem, to is this something where I think we potentially could make money, revenue from it? How did you tell me a little bit more about that? I'd love to dive into that because
there's a lot of work done prior to that. In that period of discussing with Hiscox, reams of questions. Why aren't the major insurance companies offering drone insurance? Why is it being excluded in policies? What's the risk? How severe? What's the potential for catastrophic injury? Because there's obviously a fear. Because at the time, back in 2015, people only really sort of identified drones from a military perspective. So there's always a negative connotation there. So when you're bringing it up with people, the biggest concerns were, it was actually what's that doing up there? It can fall on my head. That wasn't actually the concern. It was more, there's a danger, it's spying on me, there's invasion of privacy. So that was one of the first key areas, is I wanted to add into our policy things that, from my experience speaking to people, were their concerns, which actually weren't actually covered in the existing policies. So sort of data protection, invasion of privacy, those sort of areas, because that was the fear of people from the viewpoint of drones. Whereas the insurers are all more concerned about a drone falling out of the sky and causing some sort of large liability loss. So it was me trying to explain to the insurers, actually, technology's advancing so quickly that these things are incredibly safe. And then also reassuring the public that invasion of privacy isn't the biggest issue out there, but you have to be worried about the drone going into somebody. So very much an education on both sides, and I'm sitting in the middle, and I'm acting a bit like a sponge. So taking knowledge on what the customer's needs are, and at the same time understanding the risks and concerns that the insurers have. And unfortunately, when I started the business, it's a bit facetious of me to say it was all me. Hiscox were putting all their chips on me. I had partnered with a colleague of mine and we both had sort of an acquaintance who had a relatively successful broker business, and he was very much our guide in terms of the insurance world, in terms of helping us navigate our way through the regulatory and the compliance aspects of the industry, and how to set up as an insurance company for a start. I think we'll come on to it later, but just terms such as being an IAR, being an AR, being fully authorized, is all new to me. And I had to sort of get to understand and get to grips with these business acronyms very, very quickly. It was all new and thoroughly, very, really interesting, exciting. But I did see them as sometimes a bit of as a block to business, and I can come on to that later.
Yeah, no, I think what's fascinating is when you talk to a lot of people who want to launch a new product, it's normally not for them. And so they sort of don't have that same customer perspective. And you're kind of very much coming from this is the type of insurance that I need or needed or still need. This is what I need to cover. And actually what the insurers are worried about, and then they sort of focus on, as you say, things drop from the sky. It's like, well, that's not the risk. This is the real risk that people are worried about. And it actually gives you a far more consumer or customer focused proposition than a typical aircraft insurance with just the words changed. So,
well, the idea of risk and what people's view of that risk is completely different. I'll speak to the CEA and the regulators, and if they're getting in a manual to authorize to fly, and that the route of the journey is over the the English Channel, from the CEA's point of view, great. It's a health. There's no one there. There's no there's going to be no injuries or all being well, no issues with that. As an insurer, we're thinking, well, actually, there's a serious concern from our point of view, because if that drone or that expensive payload goes down in a sea, you're looking at probably a total loss, because you're looking at how long that system is in the water. You've got corrosion, seawater. So we're calculating risk completely differently to how the regulators are calculating risk. So there's always a conflicting views on what is the risk.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me, so in terms of when we from my experience, when you have an idea or a proposition, you have this view, and then you normally hit something, which means you have to pivot, change, adjust. Okay, have you got any of those kind of key kind of pivot moments that you went?
Well, there was one. We'd launched 2016, and it was really going really well, and I'd managed to approach it slightly differently, because you had to become a drone pilot, you had to get insurance before you actually qualified. So you need to take insurance out to do your exam,
Right.
and you could only get a policy for a year. So the long and short of it is, I called up all the drone training schools at the time and worked on partnership arrangements whereby we would offer their pilots like a day cover just for their exam, and they would get a discount on their insurance for the annual premium once their qualifications had been authorized through the CEA. And it was really successful. And listen, as with any good idea, often competitors come in and copy you, which is fair enough. Yeah. But one thing at the time when we launched the product, it was called insuranceForDrones.com. So it was very much that's what it says on the tin, which I thought was a great name. I was like really pleased with it.
That's quite 6 months later. You can always tell when you get in there first, when you can choose that kind of domain name, can't you?
Yeah. But this is the problem. A company launched about 6 months later we were called insureyourdrone.com. Theirs was called insuredrones.co.uk. And I was like, that's it. Threw my hands up in the air. Nightmare. This is a large company. So my business partner at the time said, "Don't worry, we'll sort this out. We'll speak to the lawyers." And the lawyer said, "Well, actually, there's nothing really you can do. It's a sort of a generic name. You've not got any brand capital in the market." So Paul, my business partner at the time, called me up to respond to what the lawyer had said, and he said, "Simon, honestly, they don't really care what the name is. We can call ourselves Moonrock for all I care." And I was like, "That's it. That's the name." It was he just threw out the first name that came into his head. And it was actually, I know it doesn't seem like a big deal, but actually at the time when I thought everything depended on brands, it didn't actually. But what it did is it allowed us to become a brand about more than just drones. It was a meaningless name, but we created a company, an ethos around Moonrock. And we weren't just pigeonholed to being sort of drones.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
And it was more memorable because people always ask me, "Well, how did you come up with that name?" And it's a good story.
Yeah, that really
There's
is.
always a story behind it.
But it's really interesting because one of the challenges that insurance faces, it gets very commoditized. You go onto comparison sites and it's just a motor insurance, and I think all of a sudden you've got, well, why are you called Moonrock? What's that got? And you've got then a story to. I think, yeah, some of these kind of wonderful light bulb moments that you kind of go, "Oh, that was nice." So it's kind of interesting. So you're kind of.
Oh, and we did therefore then went and registered and trademarked that name, so to make sure there was no recourse going forward.
When you suddenly realize that your name becomes important, trademark is kind of,
Absolutely.
I had the same kind of spirit. My company's called Innovate 21, and then BT launched a competition called Innovate 21. I went, what do I do now? So, it's always interesting. So I did have trademark, but it was,
And it's expensive. You start to talk about trademarking, and then you know, UK trademarks, European trademarks,
yeah,
international trademarks. That's a whole different, you know, rabbit warren of legality you don't want to be
exactly,
falling into.
exactly. But it's nice to have a little certificate, isn't it, on the wall somewhere as well.
Yes, that's right.
So you've launched it. You kind of it feels like you've launched your product, commercial pilots, but the drone market has kind of exploded. So how have you kept in touch with those developments? Because that's probably one of the sort of, it's not just insurance, but you've got to keep up with the technology and what's happening. So how do you kind of keep in touch with that and still managing to know what your customers how does that happen?
So it was a lot of engagement. You know, I spent a lot of time, nights, early mornings. There was finding out where the communities were. So, you know, back in 2016, 2017, Facebook forum groups, and they might not be so prevalent today, but very much was engaging in those forum groups, being a voice who could answer questions on insurance requirements. So there'd be a forum on particular manufacturers. People were saying, I've got issues with this. And then people would say, well, I've had a crash. And then we'll say, is it insured? And people would say, well, who's your insurance company? And, you know, you'd pitch in with saying, hi, I'm Simon. I've got an insurance company. And it was just about engagement and building up those relationships.
Yeah.
Being involved with the drone training schools as well gave me a great insight into what was happening from a regulatory point of view. And you start to go to conferences, you start to meet the regulators, because the regulators want to ensure that, well, they were always looking, there was always two potential blockers to the growth of the market.
Okay.
And that would have been regulation and insurance, because drone the market wouldn't have been able to prosper without an insurance market having faith in the industry.
Yeah.
Because if the premiums were too high, if you're a startup or a new company,
Yeah.
you know, premiums would have been a blocker, a prohibitor to growth.
Yeah.
So we were very keen to make sure that premiums were manageable and reflected the what was basically a very small market, very niche market. If you started charging tens of thousands of pounds for a premium, these businesses wouldn't take off, and therefore that didn't then lead on to new technologies and new growth and new opportunities in different market sectors. So we wanted to be very much a support. So there, and I look back now, and I sat on the British Standards Institute for Safety and Regulation of Insurance, a number of different government committees in terms of giving my input, because we would have thousands of customers. So I got a very good knowledge of what the market was saying, the pilots were saying, to feed that back to the regulators, to help them better understand the market from a client point of view, because the regulators often, there's quite a disconnect between the market and the regulators. They're a lot better now because the growth in the drone industry is astronomical, and they're much more engaged. But at the time, there wasn't much interaction between the regulators and the commercial market.
Would the regulators have come from a background in sort of aircraft and airlines, so having that perspective rather than coming from a drone? So they almost don't understand the market. Was that one of the?
Yeah, no, that's true. The regulators have, just by their very nature, are cautious, and there's often a time lag. And I hear this a lot across all industries when it comes to technology. You just look at AI, and you look at any sort of technology is flying ahead with what it can do, and the regulators are always trying to play catch up. And it's very much the same with drones. We know what drones can do and what they're capable of doing, but the regulators are much slower in playing catch up to allow those sort of things to happen. But they're so much better than they were. The past three years with the regulators, they've seen a huge improvement. I actually want to go back to sort of the COVID era, actually, because it was quite an important time for the business. I thought the business was going under. You know, I remember sitting in the office and the phone's just best every 10 minutes. So people just calling up, can we cancel our policy? Like, yeah, I understand. Come back to us in the, you know, once this clears up, you know, we'll be back, you know, we'll be back. And I'll be thinking, that's great. And more and more and more, and thinking this is awful. I got to the Friday afternoon on the first weekend, I think it was. And I was looking at the numbers, it was just off the charts. And then 10 days later, the phone started going, can I renew my policy, please? Or new customer, I've just bought a drone, can I get insurance, please? And it turbocharged not only my business, but it turbocharged the whole sector. Because clever people and I realized that during lockdown and there was social distancing, drones could do jobs that didn't need lots of people on site. So if you were a TV production company, or you were in the middle of doing a budget, you were doing a feature film, you didn't need lots of cameramen on set. You could just have one pilot there using the drone to operate where you might have needed 3 or 4 people. And the same could be said for across all sectors. We could talk about surveying, construction, you know, just didn't need the number. And all of a sudden, people were then realizing, wow, I can use a drone to do this, or I can use a drone to do that. And those ideas have now crossed multidisciplines. So agriculture, crop spraying, fertilizing, survey inspection, architecture, blue light services.
I've got examples. Doing some work with a water company, and they are using drones to fly out into the middle of reservoirs to test the water quality. Before they would be on a boat and either rowing or getting in.
Yeah.
And so now they can just send a drone, and actually they're trying to work out how to get the drone underwater. But
you look at things like wind farms. You know, we've got thousands of miles of offshore and onshore wind farms, and you know, for blade inspections, it's a very long-winded way of inspecting the blades. You'd send somebody up onto the blades, and they'd have to abseil down and do photographic analysis of the blades and check the integrity of them, because they obviously sometimes bird strikes, and making sure they're still they're integral. You've got drones now who can do the job in half a day, which would take weeks for one man to, and you've got the safety implications from that. You don't need the man dangling off a rope 300 feet off the air. So every industry is being revolutionized by drones. It really is. And I'll come on to it later, but in terms of the future of drones and the opportunities out there, it's endless. Yeah, I think we've been going maybe 2 months or so. We got a call from a chap saying he owned a crematorium, and he'd had an inquiry from somebody who'd lost a relative of theirs and wanted to have their ashes scattered in some remote location off the coast, and asked if we would insure he created this contraption which released the ashes from the drone a certain distance. Unfortunately, it was not something that the insurers were keen on doing at the time. But yeah, there were so many different incredible opportunities for drones. People wake up each morning with a new idea and test it and go for it.
I think it's one of those things, isn't it? It's like a mindset shift, and it's almost like it's connecting. And I mean, I think I've seen it obviously in the film industry, you know, hiring the helicopters to do it, and now we don't need the helicopter, we can just use the drone, which I'm not quite sure what it does to helicopter pilots. They probably become drone pilots. But
well, I think one of the key considerations from the insurer's point of view is, from a defensive play, from protecting their book of business, they saw the number of helicopter flights reducing. Mm-hmm. So they needed to make up for the loss of income for insuring helicopters, and also be proactive by thinking, well, this is a market that's not got legs, it's got wings, and it's going to take off. And I hate to use the pun. I can come with every pun imaginable. So they wanted to make sure they were ahead of the curve in terms of understanding the drone market. And you're right, helicopters, I think there's I saw some quotes, I think 20, expecting 20,000 less helicopters to be insured over the next 3 years.
Right.
That's because drones it used to cost £6,000 a day for someone like Pinewood Studios to hire in a helicopter for, I don't know, James Bond film. And all that's done by drones now. The quality of the cameras that are used as payloads for drones is absolutely fantastic. So you just don't need the helicopters anymore.
No, I think it's amazing. So you've kind of, I know, are we sort of jumping around your journey, which is fine. I'm enjoying.
That's how my brain works. You ask my brain often jumps around.
Like, I can imagine that you probably don't sit still for very long. So it's kind of probably doing.
This is tough sitting still for this long.
I'm very sorry. We should go on a journey of like follow you around and get a drone to follow you, maybe, and then do that way. But and just, so you started off. Obviously, Hiscox have kind of supported you. I think you're now not a sort of like a scheme or something. How did that? And talk. You know, if it's something that you are able to talk about, the move from having being your almost master of your own kind of underwriting or sort of capacity. How did that kind of come about? Because
this was the hardest part for me to get to grips with, was understanding how to operate a business in the insurance world, because I'd been used to getting a product and selling it.
Yeah.
But you start to move into the financial services market, and you are then faced with a lot of regulatory and compliance work.
Yeah.
So when I started the business, I just wanted to start trading. So the easiest way to do that was to become an appointed representative.
Yeah.
And we were an appointed representative of my original business partner's brokerage at the time. And we were with them for 3 years. As we grew, they just couldn't manage, no disrespect them, but just the size as the business was growing. There was just so much going on. It was, although we were paying them for their services, it was still a drag on their business. Yeah. So we became another AR of another much larger broker, which was a bit more of a problematic. We thought it was going to be a great opportunity for us. It was actually not such a great opportunity, because we were an afterthought for their business. We were foisted upon a particular part of their business. Yeah. And when you're an AR, yes, it allows you to trade, but you have to go through their principal firm for absolutely everything. So we never really had sight of the full picture of our finances. So in terms of who was paying, who had not paid, what was owed to the insurers, chasing customers for payment, what the figures were, because that all sat with the principal firm. So we never had a real oversight of the whole business.
Right.
We became fully regulated in July 2023, and it's changed everything, because we can see where everything is, what happens behind the scenes in terms of the financing. It took a lot of effort to get there, and I think in hindsight, I should have become an AR earlier. But when you're growing the business and what you want to do is bring in, speaking to the customers, bring sales, it does help by not having to think about the regulatory piece so much. But actually, it was probably an idea. I should have done it a good few years earlier. But it's important to know in insurance, there's a lot of regulatory compliance work to do. And it's something you can't just sort of forget about or put to one side. It's there every single day, and for good reason. We want to make sure we treat our customers fairly. We're responsible with insurer money. It's something that I've really had to focus on, because it's not a core skill of mine, and I've had to bring in people to help me along the way in that journey. Yeah,
I think it is, as you say, really interesting that your background is around kind of, let's just start selling stuff. As you said, you can sell anything. So you said selling stuff, and then actually, I think that's one of the challenges with insurance, isn't it? It's that long sort of tail nature. You sell something, but at some point you might have a claim, and to not have a view of actually, the finances probably was a very strange situation, because you've always probably seen that before, and you're like, I don't know what's going on. He had no sort of sight of things and almost making decisions without understanding what really was going on. So
Very much so. And as an AR, especially if you're like a very small business, and it's been foisted upon some manager in a much larger organization, we're not his key focus. I'm asking him if this bit of marketing material is okay to release, because I've got to get everything checked. I might not hear back from them for a week, but I've missed the opportunity of that bit of marketing that I wanted to send out for a PR campaign, or I wanted to go down a particular sales route. Again, had to go through the compliance to be checked. Might have missed the opportunity. So I was never in control of my own destiny, really. Yeah. And for good reason. The regulators want to make sure that you are selling services that are compliant and fully regulated. But as I say, I think in hindsight, I should have done it earlier than I did. Sorry.
Well, I think one of the things interesting, we talk all about timing, and that's kind of a lesson. It sounds like you haven't been too badly, but you're now kind of, I wish I've done this earlier. It's like sort of the kind of, but actually is. One of the things I think when we spoke before this, you talked about the timing of you were sort of almost very fortunate with the timing. You were kind of almost a Goldilocks timing. You weren't too early, you weren't too late. Tell me a bit more about that. When you look back at it, it's almost how the stars aligned in terms of that perspective.
Yeah, it's very cliche to say that, but it was very fortuitous, and it's not. There's a lot of hard work that goes on behind the scenes, but it very much did fall down to timing. I think if we'd approached Hiscox at the time 6 months earlier, I don't think they would have agreed to it. I think we would have been too early.
Yeah.
But I think there was just enough conversations around the edges about drones that it pricked their attention. I think if we'd launched 6 months later or a year later, we wouldn't have had the market position, the market share that we're in now, because others would have come into the market. And in the past 6-7 years, we've seen half a dozen competitors come into the market. And it's always a worry when a competitor comes into the market. You eagerly look at what they're doing. You're looking at their rating, looking at their pricing, you're looking at their marketing. And you can think, well, they've just blatantly copied that from my website. But there's nothing you can really do about it apart from accept it and make sure that your business is always innovating and always bringing up something new.
Yes.
So yes, always keep an eye on your competitor, but don't let that be the whole determining factor of your life as to what is my competitor doing, because you'll never develop your own product and keep growing the ideas from that product because you're too focused on your competitor. There was we had a very serious competitor 4 years ago who were funded a considerable amount of money, grew very, very quickly. And what they did, they had a pay-per-play model. So real-time pricing, pay-per-fly, it was called.
Right.
And it was a serious competitor to us, because we were offering an annual policy. As an example, let's say it was £150 for the year. They were coming to the market and saying, well, we'll just insure that one flight you're doing for £8.20. Now, on the surface, that seems like a phenomenal deal. So what we did, we went away and looked at the figures. Well, actually, if you're charging a flight for £8.50, but that £1,000 drone crashes, how many hours have they got to do to make up just for that one drone that's gone down? And I had to sit on my hands, and I was concerned that there was that would be the market norm, would be pay per fly. But what myself and Hiscox at the time and people I'd spoken to realized was it wasn't a viable business product. Not to say it's not a good idea, but there weren't enough flights taking place annually across the market to justify a pay per fly type of insurance.
Yeah.
There weren't thousands of hours of drones going backwards and forwards across the sky to justify the voluminous of premium needed to cover. Well, if there was one claim of 5 million, there wasn't £5 million worth of premium in the market to justify a £5 million claim. So even less if you were just charging them £8.50 for a flight.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. That's interesting.
Anyhow, the long and short of it is that company still very successful, but they pivoted out of drones and moved into the pay-per-drive market for cars, which is competitive, but there's billions of miles of driving done.
Yeah, no, that's I think that's really interesting. It's a little bit like sort of some of the travel policies you buy annual, but you're kind of, it's that volume piece that doesn't count. But it's interesting. There's a question,
and that's not to say that we're looking at, and that's an area that we are heavily developing out, is that what does the future of insurance look like? How is it going to be purchased? How is it going to be bought? Yeah. And how do people want to buy that insurance? I'd always said, and I still believe it, that if you're the financial controller of a large company, you want to know what your insurance premium is for the year because you want to put it into your forecasts. You don't want to be surprised at the end of each month with a figure of different variables, because how can you plan how can you account for that over a 12-month period? Yeah. So there's horses of courses. People are going to want different ways of purchasing their insurance, and as long as we can cater to that, then we'll do it.
Excellent. Well, that actually linked in with a question that somebody's asked around what often happens as a sector. Insurance struggles with how to integrate technology into existing, often cumbersome processes. So how did you ensure that the customer journey was easy? Because your experience of, too many documents to read through, and so how did you sort of, it sounds like you're in control of your kind of process now, more so than you were now you're at IR. So how do you make sure that that's easy? How do you sort of ensure that people kind of get it, drone pilots are able to go through? So talk to me about that sort of.
So the questions that we were asked in the early days, we wanted to halve, literally look at 25 questions. How can we halve that?
Yeah.
And then how can we halve that again? So where we are now is at a point that we're very happy with, where it's a really seamless process. Most of the questions are actually statements of fact. So apart from the details about the value of your drone, the levels of liability that you need, it's more being able to put them into a statement of facts to say, making sure that you're flying within the relevant regulatory authorities, that you understand the operations, that you have the relevant qualifications. And it's more of a, yes, I accept it, as opposed to, we want tons and tons of information, which therefore might trigger a referral, which means we're then having to contact the customer to ask for more information and then have to go to rewrite it and underwrite it and maybe speak to the insurers again. We want to ensure that it's as slick and as seamless as possible. So from where we were to where we are now, it's a whole different product. I can come on to it later, but we do have Hiscox as one of our carrier capacities, our capacity providers, I'm sorry. But from the position that we were in, fortunately, we got to see a lot of the new development work in drones. So things like swarm displays, beyond visual line of sight, heavy lift drones.
So you're going to go through all these, and that was one of my questions. I wanted to say, like, what's happening next with drones, and how are you keeping in touch with the developments of a very fast-moving sector? So what are some of the things that you're seeing? Because people just think of sometimes the little droners, but actually it's so much more than that. So tell me about some of those. What's the drone technology, and then as a insurer, how do you keep in touch?
Yeah. So being on the front line, really, it's seeing what's going on in the market. So what would happen is the market's changed a little bit as well. The profile of a drone pilot has changed. 5 or 6 years ago, we were getting people who wanted insurance who might have spent 35 years behind a desk as an accountant in IT, heard that they could become a drone pilot, do a drone training course, and then they could sell their services as a drone pilot to a myriad of different organizations, surveying, inspection, TV, and they'd go to a production company and say, I'll charge you £1,500 a day and I'll film all this for you. And it was sort of a gold rush moment, actually. Thousands and thousands of people became drone pilots because it was really easy. Really easy. your qualification allowed you to do wedding photography on a Saturday morning, and then maybe do some agricultural survey inspection on a Sunday afternoon. Now, it's actually two different types of flight operations, but the qualification allowed you to do it. Yeah. What we've seen in the past 18 months is a consolidation of the market, where if you were a surveying company and you were buying in those services for a day at £1,500, that business is going, why should I do that? I might as well just train my surveyors up themselves to be pilots, so I don't have to bring in an external pilot, because the cost of drones is reduced. The qualification, the ability to become a pilot's become even easier in terms of online training courses, and that all comes into different weight classes of the drone, how far you're flying, where you're flying. If you're a surveyor, you can do an online course for sort of 90 quid, go flying your drone and do your surveying. So what that's allowed us, so the profile of the pilots changed. So it's become much more orientated to organizations buying drone insurance and utilizing drones, as opposed to the individual. And then the drone technology has grown exponentially. I wrote on my first business plan, rough draft, and I actually, when it did get sent out, was just sort of a throwaway comment at the end. I'd written, and I guarantee one day you'll be able to get your Amazon deliveries by food. Ha 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 ha. But we're there. That I expected 30 years down the line. 5 years. We're 5 years, 6 years into it, and you can already, in some parts of the world, order your food on your app and get it delivered by drone. So technology is moving at an exponential rate, and I'm fortunate enough to be in the conversation. So in my position of a knowledge center, I was getting requests, these weird and wacky requests saying, got this drone and it can lift 250 kilos worth of stuff, and didn't sit within certain appetites with our existing provider. So I went to the market and had a great meetings with some insurers who saw this as I remember I talked to you about being defensive and offensive, because they saw their helicopter booked. So a couple of insurers obviously identified that and wanted to back us in terms of the larger risks that we were doing. And that has been a lot of my focus for the past 18 months, is working with the new capacity providers, identifying and quantifying risk for drone operations that are sort of non-standard. And it is absolutely incredible, some of the stuff we're seeing now. It's fantastic.
This has been a fantastic conversation. Unfortunately, we have to go probably on and do some work at some point today, don't we? So, but this has been a fantastic thing. I've really enjoyed the conversation. It's just been tremendous just to hear your story, the things that stick out, some of your learnings. It's been just fantastic, and also to be at that kind of that cusp point of like, I'm trying not to use too many pun words, but it's all going to come out. But
it's difficult.
After it's taking off, and you're sort of like, you just kind of like, I just think what's really interesting is you're now kind of in that position where there's so many things happening with the drone space, and you're right involved with it, from going from some guy flying I say a little drone, but a big drone to swarm drones, to delivery drones, to there'll be passenger drones. You get into this whole space where people are going, what else can we do with drones? I think it's just a really, really interesting space. So this has been fascinating.
Thanks, Harvey.
I just want to, for the rest of the guys, just talk about what we're doing next month. So if you just bear with me, Simon, if that's okay.
No problem.
So next month, everybody, we have M. Connelly joining us. M's one of these really, really curious people. He works for Generali, but he's always into new stuff. He's I just love him when he comes to speak, because he kind of like, he wears a suit and then wears a cap. You know, it's kind of like, I don't really care what people think about me. He's kind of really into sort of AI, into metaverse, just exploring, well, what does that mean for insurance? So really encourage you to join. I'll put the link in the chat if you want to register for that. But the same as today, we're going to have like an hour's conversation with them, just exploring the kind of things that he's been looking at, as part of his. To be honest, he'd be looking at this whether he's employed by Generali or not. He's just a curious guy. So be really interesting to hear what he's going to say from that. So if I put the event here, if you want to register. I think that's worked. Some weird thing coming from me on the chat. But yes, just want to say thank you for your time. Simon, thank you. This has been absolutely
Thanks
brilliant.
for having me, Harvey. Very kind of you. Thank you.
We will be putting the recording for those that want to catch up. That will be coming out to you soon. But just thank you. Have a great rest of the day, a great Friday, and a great weekend when you get to it. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Harvey.
Cheers.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Thanks, Simon.
Thank you. Bye.